Hello, friends. Thank you for being here. Each of you makes this channel alive and special. Thanks to your support, I can share stories, thoughts, and emotions that hopefully resonate in your heart. If you have just started exploring my content, welcome. Real-life stories are waiting for you here. Subscribe, like, and share your impressions. Your voice is very important to me. My son-in-law held up a wine glass that probably cost more than my first car, glancing at me from across the table. In front of his investors, he called me a loser. Everyone laughed, assuming they were teasing a retired school principal. What they didn't realize was they were actually making fun of the guy who held their financial fate. My quiet comeback didn't just kill the dinner mood, it ended his career. We were at a restaurant named Oral, fittingly pretentious with its crystal clinks echoing like a nervous heartbeat against serious, murmured conversations. I was sitting on a chair prissier than my couch, feeling out of place at a dinner supposedly for me but really not about me at all. Mark, my son-in-law, sat at the head of the table playing the charming host. His custom suit gleamed under the dim lights, and each of his moves was a well-rehearsed act of power and confidence. I was in my best outfit, a simple navy wool suit I bought 10 years ago for my wife's funeral. It was meant to show quiet dignity, but surrounded by shiny watches and designer outfits, it felt like something from another era, when a man's worth didn't depend on labels. A waiter quietly placed a plate before me, holding a lone scallop with some foamy stuff and tiny flowers around it. Looking at it, I imagined my late wife Carol chuckling, not mockingly, but genuinely amused. "For this price, David," she'd whisper with a smile, "you could buy the whole boat." Carol was the visionary, the one who turned her grandma's sauce recipe into our garage business. We worked together, the smell of tomatoes and basil always there, hands tired but happy. This world of fancy dishes wasn't ours. It was Mark's. As I watched the waiter subtly slip the fancy bill near Mark's elbow, a familiar quiet pain echoed inside me. Although it was Mark's world, it was my money paying for it, thanks to the supplementary credit card linked to the Harrison Family Trust, Carol's legacy. Mark decided it was time to shine. He tapped his glass, the sharp sound slicing through the restaurant chatter, pulling everyone's attention. His grin was that of a conqueror, with prospective investors watching eagerly. Two men with slick looks and expensive suits listened intently. Jessica, my daughter, sat next to him, her smile tense and delicate, like a doll carefully placed. Had she forgotten how to be herself? "Friends, colleagues," Mark started, his voice polished and smooth. "I'm grateful you're here to celebrate the future, a future of innovation, growth, and great success." He bragged about his company, Sterling Financial, using buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and paradigm shift, aiming to dazzle while concealing the truth of debt and desperation underneath. I knew it all from my financial advisor's reports, yet stayed silent for Jessica. For Jessica, I always held my tongue. He lifted his glass higher. But success means nothing without family. It's the backbone of all achievements. He nodded at Jessica, her blush perfectly timed. Then he turned to me, the warmth from his gaze gone, replaced by a condescending smirk. I knew that look. A predator no longer bothered to pretend its prey is an equal. "And of course," he continued, voice dripping with fake sincerity, "we must thank my father-in-law, David, who retired after a long, noble career as an educator." The word educator dropped out of his mouth like an illness. The two investors chuckled softly. "David," he said, "is here to show us all you don't need to be a winner to sit at the winner's table." The room suddenly became heavy as the insult landed hard. I looked at Jessica, hoping she'd say something, jump in to defend. Yet she didn't say a thing. Her eyes stayed on the intricate pattern on her plate, as if it held life's deepest secrets. When she stayed quiet, it was like she was silently agreeing. But that same silence felt like a betrayal to me. Fueled by that silence, Mark leaned forward, ready to strike. With a cocky grin, he finally asked the question that had been eating away at him. "So, David," he said, making sure everybody heard, "what's it like being a loser?" For a second, everyone in the room froze. But then, one of the investors snorted, starting a ripple of uncomfortable, fake laughter. The laugh was at my expense, the old-timer in outdated gear. To them, I was just a worn-out relic. Each laugh hardened a part of me that had been soft for too long, the part that took every sneer. I'd taken the belittling remarks, the outright disrespect, just to keep things smooth. But suddenly, I noticed a change. My love for my daughter was deep, but somehow I'd let her husband drill a poisonous well right into it. Yet I didn't lose my cool. Years as a school principal had shown me that the loudest person is often the weakest. So, I waited. I let them get their laughs out, watched it fade into an awkward silence. I made eye contact with each of them until their smiles dropped and they looked away. Finally, my gaze rested on Mark. Although he still wore a grin, doubt had started creeping in. He thought he'd humiliate me, make me feel small, but he didn't bank on me staring back, unfazed. I returned his look with a gentle, calm smile. My daughter Carol would know it well. It's what I wore before taking a stand. In a controlled, steady voice, I posed my own question. "Mark," I said, letting his name sink in, "how does it feel knowing that, from now on, this loser won't be paying your way?" The room went dead silent, like I'd yanked a plug that drained all noise. Mark's smug grin didn't just disappear, it collapsed. His face went pale, almost ghostly. One of the investors, laughing hardest before, froze with his wine glass mid-air. I heard a fork drop onto a plate. Then I saw my daughter. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes showing a raw kind of fear. The beautiful surface now laid bare, frighteningly real. That silence echoed louder than any laughter ever could, a sign of a world breaking apart. His world. But amid the quiet, I felt the first hint of peace in years. As the taxi wove through the city streets, lights blurred past, not touching the cold silence inside the car. The rush from the restaurant dimmed, leaving a hollow ache. Mark's insult didn't stay with me. Words from someone like him are hollow, like dust in the breeze. What lingered was Jessica's expression. Jessica, sitting, eyes fixed on her plate, her hand slightly shaking as she reached for her glass. Her silence spoke volumes, cutting deep. I had lost my wife to illness. We fought that battle together until the very end. But losing my daughter felt worse, losing her to something uglier, a kind of greed that prized money over love, appearances over sincerity. My phone vibrated insistently in my pocket. No surprise who it was. A part of me, the hopeful father, yearned for an apology, for tears, for the girl who once scraped her knee and ran to me for comfort. I pulled out the phone. Jessica's name was on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I picked up, raising the phone to my ear. I had no time to say hello. Her voice erupted like a rapid, frantic storm, filled with anger and disbelief. "What did you do?" she yelled, her voice breaking. "What's wrong with you? You ruined everything." I kept quiet, letting her ragged breaths fill the silence. The driver briefly eyed me in the rearview mirror, curious, before looking back to the road. "Those people were important, Dad. Investors for Mark," she continued. "He's been working on this deal for 6 months." Her voice climbed with each word, growing louder, accusing me of wrecking everything with a single careless line. "Do you realize just how important that deal was for him?" Yep, that one word. Deal. It wasn't about earning respect. It wasn't about her dad being publicly embarrassed. Family, love, dignity. Nope, none of that. It was purely about the deal. That one word made everything click. Mark wasn't just full of himself, he was an opportunist. The whole dinner wasn't some celebration. It was all staged for his investors, with me being just one of the props. I was supposed to be the likable, retired father-in-law, a sign of stability and wealth. My role was to just sit there, smile, and be the wealthy, dependable figure he'd showcase to win trust. Blowing up at him didn't just humiliate him, it ruined his whole act. That emptiness in my chest turned into something sharp and cold. Yeah, the sadness lingered, but now it was icy clear. She wasn't upset for my sake. She was scared for herself and the lifestyle that now dangled by a thin thread. A thread I held. As she accused me, I let her words die out. I didn't raise my voice or argue. I let her comments hang in the silence. Then, in a quiet voice that felt like a heavy stone, I said the one thing that counted. "You've picked your side, Jessica." I didn't stick around to hear her comeback. I wasn't interested in excuses or explanations. I hit the red button to end the call and slid my phone back into my pocket. Now, the silence in the taxi felt different. It wasn't about grief or shock anymore. It was the silence of someone set on a course. Someone who had faced an awful truth and knew exactly what to do next. Staring out the window, I wasn't focused on the passing scenery. My mind was on the road ahead. This battle wasn't done. It was just getting started. I barely managed 2 hours of sleep, and even that felt fragmented. Dreams were filled with flashes of my daughter's face. When I woke, the sun was casting shadows on my bedroom floor. The anger and shock of the previous night were gone. In their place was an unshakable clarity, solid as a diamond in my gut. I knew my path. Calling a lawyer would come later. First, I needed clarity. I needed facts. I reached out to Grace. Grace Connolly had been my financial guide for 15 years. In her late 50s, her sharp eyes and steady way of talking always put me at ease. She'd helped us with the early stages of Carol's kitchen business, navigated the healthcare expenses, and set up the company's sale and the trust afterward. Her office wasn't flashy like that restaurant. It was all about quiet competence with dark wood furniture, rows of financial books, and the comforting smell of paper and coffee. Just being there felt safe, grounded. Grace met me at her office door, her face showing professional concern. "David," she said gently, "I got your message. Come on in, have a seat. Coffee?" She knew from my look that I wasn't into chit-chat. I settled into one of the leather chairs by her big desk, taking a moment to just absorb. She was a link to a past when everything seemed right. "Grace," I started, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to handle 2 things right away." She leaned forward, hands clasped, all ears. "First," I said, "we need to cut off the extra credit card tied to the trust account, the one under Jessica's name. From now on, no more charges should go through." Grace's eyebrows rose slightly, the only hint of surprise. She knew that Jessica had used that card for ages. It covered everything from groceries to luxurious trips with Mark. Cutting it off would be like turning off the water to a grand estate. But she didn't question it, just jotted down a note. "Consider it done," she said. "Second," I went on, "I need a thorough forensic audit of the Harrison Family Trust. Details on every penny spent over the last 5 years. Track all withdrawals, transfers, and statements. I need to see where everything went." Grace decided it was time to ask some questions. "David, that's a massive job you're asking for. It's going to take some time for my team. Mind telling me what's happening? Is everything all right?" I sank back into my chair, its leather making a soft creak beneath me. "No, Grace, it's not okay." I stopped to gather my thoughts, not the feelings, but the real facts. "You were around when I set this all up. Remember why we did it?" Her face softened. She did remember. "The trust wasn't about cash," I told her, keeping my voice even but strong. "The $50 million is just numbers on a page. The trust was really about Carol. Keeping her life's work safe was the true purpose." Memories rushed back, the smell of spices in our old garage workshop, the flour smudged on Carol's cheek, her laughter when we were up late perfecting her grandma's tomato sauce recipe. Carol's kitchen was more than a brand. It was part of us, her dream. We built it from scratch. I gazed out at the bustling New York street through her office window. When she got sick, all the money in the world couldn't give me one more day with her. After she passed away, the business felt hollow, just a shell with memories. So I sold it. And we, the lawyers, you and I, set up the trust in that particular way. Remember the terms? Grace nodded slowly. Perfectly. You're the sole trustee for the rest of your life. You have full control over all asset distributions. Jessica is the beneficiary after you die, but until then, she has no legal say. None at all. Exactly, I said, turning back to her. I, Emma, am the trustee and guardian. It's structured like that to protect our daughter from herself and anyone who might take advantage of her. But beyond that, it was to honor Carol's legacy, to make sure what we created would provide safety and not fuel something else. I didn't need to dive into Mark's arrogance or Jessica's compliance. Grace could put the pieces together. Last night, I said, my voice dropping, I realized Carol's legacy is in immediate danger. I think her life's work is being twisted into something she would have hated, serving arrogance and greed. I was blind to it for too long, Grace, but now I see it. I need you to lay everything out for me. I have to understand how big the damage is. Grace looked at me for a moment before closing her notebook, a gesture sealing our talk. I get it, David, she replied, now serious and focused. I'll have my top people on it immediately. We'll look into the credit card and Mark's business dealings first. If there's a link, we'll find it. You can expect a preliminary report on your desk by 5 k'o today. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. The hard core within me was still there, but it wasn't painful anymore. Instead, it fueled my resolve. Thanks, Grace, I said as I exited her office. Back out in the bright city sunlight, I knew I had finally started to protect my wife's legacy, not only from the world, but our daughter as well. I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter what it took. I spent the rest of the day quietly waiting, staying away from TV and newspapers, and finding comfort in my study, a space filled with books and silence. The room was warmed by the presence of my wife's memory. A picture of Carol, taken on a beach vacation 2 decades ago, stood on my desk. Her joyful and genuine smile captured the essence of goodness that had been the essence of my life. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded of the promise I made to her to protect everything we built together. As the afternoon sun bathed the room in its gentle glow, particles of dust danced in the light. The house was quiet for a moment, until the phone's ring broke the silence. A little after 5 and the caller ID displayed Grace Connie's office. My heart raced. Though I expected the call, its promptness was unsettling. I answered the phone, keeping my voice calm. David Harrison. A voice came through the phone. David, it's Grace. Her voice wasn't the usual warm one. It had turned sharp and urgent. She skipped over the chit-chat. We got the initial report, and it's a bigger mess than we thought. My grip on the old oak desk intensified, turning my knuckles white. Grace went on about the crazy personal spending spree we'd suspected. Fancy dinners, high-end clothes, luxurious vacations. Thousands spent per month, every month. But that was just the beginning of our troubles. She paused, and I heard papers shuffling on her side. Her team had started comparing public records from Mark's company, Sterling Financial, with the quarterly reports of our trust. David, Mark's been using the Harrison family trust reports to impress banks and potential investors. A shiver ran down my spine. What do you mean by using them? I asked. Grace explained, her words cutting and precise, that while Mark wasn't withdrawing funds or blatantly stealing for his company, he was being sneaky and deceptive. He was using the trust's $50 million valuation to project financial stability, posing your and Carol's reputation as if there was a solid family fortune backing his shaky business. He was spinning fantasies out of your truth. I was floored by the weight of what she was telling me. The weird scene at the restaurant, Jessica's panicky call, the over-the-top spending, signs of something much bigger. This wasn't just about disrespect. It was about twisting Carol's legacy, using what came from our hard work to keep his shaky business afloat. Grace interrupted my thoughts. Legally, David, this is a very dangerous area. It's skirting close to financial misrepresentation. Based on what he shared with investors, it could even cross into fraud. Fraud? That word shattered the quiet of my study, hitting hard. It turned my world upside down. What started as a personal nightmare was now a legal crisis. The battle I thought I was fighting was on a whole different, riskier level. This wasn't just a family issue needing a tough lesson. It had crossed into something cold, illegal, and relentless. It wasn't just about taking down a cocky young guy anymore. This was about stopping an ongoing crime. My home, once a peaceful escape, was now a battleground. Grace's call divided the past from now. Instead of fierce arguments in the coming days, we launched a careful, thorough investigation. With my go-ahead, Grace brought in a forensic accountant named Mr. Alistair Finch. He was meticulous, with glasses perched on his nose and a nose for spotting hidden truths in numbers. No emotions guided him, only data. And the story that data told was chilling beyond my fears. For a week, Alistair dove into the records in a secure room at Grace's firm, going over transaction logs, emails related to Sterling Financial, and every statement from the Harrison Family Trust that he was legally allowed to review. He was picking through those hidden clues, the small traces Mark left behind. That week felt like being stuck in a surreal limbo, trying to play it cool, but my brain just kept buzzing with anxiety. The house felt oddly quiet. Carol's memories, usually comforting, now carried a silent judgment. How did I let this happen right under my nose? Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a conference call beeped in with Grace, Alistair, and me. Alistair's voice was dry, precise, and devoid of judgment. He just laid out the facts. "Mr. Harrison," he started, "we have moved from suspected wrongdoing to having firm proof of Mark's intentional fraud." Grace gasped. That was the only other sound on the line. I sat there in silence, bracing for what came next. "Mark Sterling not only showed investors our trust statements," Alistair went on, "but he also fabricated extra documents. Copies came from someone who grew suspicious after a quick background check. Mr. Harrison, your son-in-law has been sending letters of intent to his investors." Letters of intent? The phrase left me baffled. Grace, her tone dripping with irritation, explained they were papers where someone declared they wanted to make a move, like investing a specific sum. They're supposed to instill confidence in other investors during fundraising. Alistair chimed in. "Exactly. These letters declare the Harrison Family Trust's commitment of a $5 million lead investment in Sterling Financial's upcoming financing. At least 3 such letters, each sent to different venture capital groups, prominently feature your signature." He paused for effect. "And Mr. Harrison, each one bears your signature." I felt a chill creeping in. My signature? That was impossible. I'd never put my name to such documents. "Of course not," Alistair replied calmly. "We had a handwriting expert examine them. They're forgeries, carefully crafted, likely mimicked from other documents you've signed. But forgeries nonetheless. Mark didn't just spin lies. He stamped your legally binding signature on those lies, committing classic securities fraud." Fraud. Not a vague suspicion or a gray zone anymore, but outright crime. Mark didn't just borrow my name. He twisted my identity to fleece investors for millions. But Alistair wasn't quite done yet. He went on to describe how that discovery prompted a deeper dive into Sterling Financial's real situation. Outwardly, it looked polished, wrapped up in fancy tech jargon, but below the surface, Mr. Harrison, it was empty and drowning in debt. Mark was funneling cash from new investors to clear old debts and bankroll his and Jessica's extravagant lifestyle. It wasn't about building up a company, it was a Ponzi scheme, shifting money to keep the illusion alive. The company was mere weeks, days even, from total collapse. This recent funding attempt wasn't for growth at all. It was a desperate bid to stay afloat before everything crumbled. Then everything clicked. The dinner, the investors, that smug, condescending grin. It all painted a grim image. The sneer he tossed my way across the table. How does it feel to be a loser? Wasn't just a careless dig from a cocksure guy. It was a frantic deflection from someone in utter failure. He's sinking under his own deception, reaching out to me as a last-ditch lifeline, and calls me a loser. A tragically misguided sneer from a guy who couldn't stand needing what I represented to survive. He didn't see me as a father-in-law, not even as a human being, just as a financial resource he felt entitled to exploit. And he resented me for it, loathed his dependence on me. Seeing me continually reminded him of his colossal failure. The guy who called me a loser was, in fact, drowning far worse than anyone. And he wanted to drag down my wife's legacy and me along with him into that dark abyss. The forensic accountant's report laid out Mark's deceit in stark, unemotional numbers and legalese, detailing the what and the how. But alone in my house, I was wrestling with a persistent question. My own, not Mark's. Mark's motive was plain: unrestrained greed from a man teetering on desperation. What gnawed at me was my own part. How did I let it all unfold this way? How was I blind for so long? My mind was a chaotic swirl of numbers, legal messes, and impending financial doom. I needed something simple to focus on, something tangible. So, I ventured up to the attic. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, dust, and echoes of the past. It felt like a museum of our shared life. Old furniture covered like ghosts in white sheets. Stacks of photo albums all but leaning on each other. It was a place I'd steered clear of for years, afraid of the sting from those sharp memories. I started to sort through a stack of old magazines, finally deciding to discard them when my fingers brushed against a cardboard box, tucked in a shadowy corner. Scribbled on the box in familiar, elegant writing were words that took my breath away. Carol's Kitchen. My heart skipped a beat. I gently pulled the box into the dim light filtering through the dusty window. The tape was brittle and aged. I carefully peeled it back, handling everything inside with a reverence that seemed almost ceremonial. On top was a stack of cheap diner napkins, the kind from the place where Carol and I used to sip coffee each morning before working in the garage. Every napkin carried faded ink sketches. They were our first attempts at a logo, a cheerful tomato, a whisk and spoon crossed like a family emblem, and our almost final pick, a heart made from 2 basil leaves. I recalled the debates and laughter over those designs, with that wild hope only felt when creating a dream from the ground up. Underneath the napkins were pictures, faded Polaroids from the pre-digital days. There was Carol with a smudge of flour on her nose, grinning brilliantly at me from behind heaps of fresh tomatoes. Then there was one of me, younger and leaner, thoroughly exhausted but proud, beside our first jar shipment. I could almost feel the rough wood of the pallet in my hands, the pride, the shared belief we were on the verge of something major. At the bottom of the box was the true treasure, her recipe book. A simple, well-loved notebook with a tatty soft cover. I picked it up, feeling its precious weight. As I opened it, I saw pages turned yellow and stained with olive oil and tomato sauce, a testament to countless batches of her incredible marinara. Carol's handwriting filled every page, not just with ingredients and measurements, but with small notes, too. "Add more garlic," she'd noted on one. "This is the one that made David dance in the kitchen," said another. As I ran my thumb over the wrinkled paper, it was like a journey back in time. This book was the heart of our business, the essence of all we had worked for. It was her. Holding it, the dusty attic faded away. Suddenly, I was in a sterile hospital room, full of antiseptic smell and stifling silence. The only sound was the heart monitor's steady beep. Carol, weak and frail, looked nothing like the vibrant woman in the images, yet her eyes remained clear and shining. She gripped my hand with unexpected strength. "David," she rasped softly, "promise me." "Anything, Carol. Anything," I responded, leaning in, my heart aching. "Look after our girl," she said, a lone tear slipping down her cheek. "She's easily led. Protect her." Then her eyes flashed with resolve. "And preserve our kitchen, what we built. Don't let them tear it down or cheapen it." I squeezed her hand, my tears making her face blurry. "I promise, Carol," I choked out. "I'll protect our daughter and never let them ruin what we built. I promise." The memory dissolved, and I was back in the attic, dust swirling silently. Guilt started to crush me. I had failed. I hadn't protected her or my daughter. I let it happen. I stood quietly while her husband, a con, a pretender, stole everything we'd built, our sweat, our love, those long nights in the garage, and cheapened it. He twisted our brand's good name into deceit, supporting his flashy, empty life. Guilt washed over me, but then a cold, righteous fury swept away any doubts or grief left. This was bigger than financial fraud or legal battles now. This was about a promise to the woman I loved. It was about honor. It was about keeping her memory alive. I gently returned the photos and napkins to the box, but the recipe book stayed with me. Holding it close against my heart, I left the attic to step back into the light. With the accountant's facts and my heart's resolve, I knew exactly what had to be done. It wasn't merely about stopping a crime, it was about keeping a promise. 3 days later, the doorbell rang with urgency, not friendliness. It was a series of sharp, frantic pushes, like an alarm. I knew before opening the door. I'd been waiting. Jessica and Mark stood there, a picture of unraveling chaos as I ushered them inside. Jessica looked like she'd been through the ringer, pale and blotchy, eyes swollen from crying. Mark was a mess too, like a cornered animal. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his expensive tie hung loose, and his face was twisted with anger and desperation. They stormed in without a thought. "Dad, the card," Jessica said, voice shaky. "It's not working. The car lease payment got denied today, and the club called about the dues. It was so embarrassing." She rattled off her complaints, sounding almost silly in the calm of my home. She thought I'd jump up to fix things as usual. But Mark cut her off, all about business. He strode into my living room and slapped a leather folder onto the coffee table, the noise echoing through the quiet house. The polished, successful CEO facade was gone, leaving only a desperate man. "Enough," he snapped at Jessica, turning to me with eyes sharp and demanding. "It's just a bank goof," he growled. "They need your signature to sort it out. Just a formality." He tried to sound relaxed, but the deception was blatantly obvious. His hand shook as he motioned to the folder. I didn't acknowledge their panic or his lies. Calmly, I went to the coffee table, picked up the folder, and settled into my favorite armchair, the one Carol always called the throne of the house. I opened it slowly, taking my time. I pulled out my reading glasses, wiped them carefully with a handkerchief, and perched them on my nose. My deliberate actions seemed to rattle them more. They stood there, eyes glued to my every move. The document was thick with tricky legal and financial terms, but some lines jumped out clear as day. Right at the top, it said, "Loan Guarantee Agreement." Further down, next to a blank line waiting for my signature, was the reason they were here. Their last shot. $5 million. Mark imagined I'd signed to guarantee a $5 million business loan for his failing venture. He wanted to risk everything Carol and I built on his sinking enterprise. I read the whole thing, but my mind was already made up. I kept the silence drawn out, letting them fully feel their desperation. Finally, I took off my glasses, folded them neatly, placing them on the table. I gazed at my daughter, her face streaked with tears, pleading but not repentant, just scared for herself. Then I looked at Mark, watching him tremble with anticipation. His temple vein throbbed with greed as I pushed the folder back across the table and said, "No." It was final, a full stop, not open to negotiation. My refusal shattered Mark's composure, releasing raw anger. "No? What do you mean, no? You clueless old man? This is about our future, everything." He started pacing like a caged beast, angry that the money meant for him and Jessica was being denied. "You're just sitting on it, old caretaker," he raged. I glanced at Jessica, who was sobbing into her hands, not for me, but for the life she wanted. She managed a faint plea to Mark, but it was without strength. She didn't stand with me, just stood with him. Mark shook her off, glaring at me with seething hatred. His voice dripped with desperation as he threatened, "You'll regret this, old man. You don't know what you've done." He dragged Jessica out by the arm, slamming the door behind them so hard it echoed. Sitting in my usual spot, I felt no fear, no regret, only peace. I'd finally done the right thing after so much struggle. He could threaten, but I was already thinking about my next step, not to defend, but to act. Even after we left, Mark's threat still hung in the air, but it was more of an empty bark than a real bite. He thought he was the predator, clueless about Alistair Finch's report that was sitting on my desk. The truth was my real weapon, way more potent than any anger. The next day, I grabbed the report and took off for Wall Street to take action. The law firm, Davies, Thorne and Caldwell, was in a massive glass and steel skyscraper that cut right into the sky. From the waiting room, I could see a sprawling web of power and money below. My lawyer, William Davies, fit right in with the scene, tall, sharply dressed, silver-haired, with a razor-sharp mind. He listened to my story, not showing any emotion as he went through the accountant's findings. Across from me at the expansive glass desk, he finally said, "Mr. Harrison," his calm voice carrying its own weight, "the evidence you've given us isn't just solid, it's overwhelming. The doctored letters and the misuse of the trust are clear examples of securities fraud and wire fraud, serious federal crimes." He let that sink in for a moment. "If you'd like, I could call today. The U.S. Attorney's Office might kick off a grand jury investigation in just a few weeks. With this evidence," he pointed to the folder, "your son-in-law could be looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison." I'd imagined this moment, exposing Mark's deceit, but the feeling wasn't triumph. Instead, an intense sadness took over. Prison. That's such a severe final outcome. I thought of Jessica, my little girl who I raised, flaws and all. She's still my daughter. Her husband going to prison, the public disgrace, the financial wreckage, it would wreck whatever's left of her life. "That's not my aim, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "I don't want revenge. I want the lies to stop. I want him stopped, but not by putting him behind bars. My wife Carol wouldn't have wanted that either. There's got to be another way." Looking out at the vast city, I said, "I want him to deal with the fallout of his actions, but it needs to happen because he trips over his own lies, not because I'm the one to burn it all down. I just want to knock out the faulty supports." Davies listened closely, a flicker of respect in his eyes as he leaned back. A public downfall, he immediately understood, instead of a private conviction. You want to tear down his influence and reputation, not his freedom. He clasped his hands, shifting from thinking like a prosecutor to a strategist. "Timing's everything here. My team's kept tabs on Sterling Financial since you brought me in. Mark's at a critical juncture." He turned his monitor towards me, showing a calendar. He's close to securing a Series B funding round. There's one last meeting with the lead investors, a venture capital firm called Oakfield Capital, this Friday at 2 p.m. in their boardroom. This presentation is everything to him, his company, his future. If he secures their $15 million investment, He can keep his act together for another year, maybe even longer. If he doesn't, Davies let the thought linger, the implication clear. I looked at the appointment on the screen. A boardroom, not a courtroom. This was Mark's territory, where he felt most in control, surrounded by the symbols and jargon he adored. Facing him there, exposing the truth in his place of power, felt perfectly fitting. It was more of a lesson than a punishment. Justice, not revenge, I affirmed confidently. That's where this ends. Mr. Davies nodded slowly, a slight smile creeping onto his face. He turned the monitor back and started typing. "Then we've got a plan to make, Mr. Harrison," he said. "We need to put together a presentation of our own." The quiet before the storm had ended. We were planning our move. As the elevator quietly ascended 60 floors, William Davies stood beside me, clutching a slim leather briefcase packed with the truth. I caught my reflection in the polished elevator doors. In my best suit, a veteran navy wool with a fresh, simple silver tie, I looked every bit the retired high school principal that I was. Today felt like the ultimate parent-teacher conference of my life. The time for nerves was long gone. All the sadness, anger, and guilt had flared and faded away in recent weeks, leaving behind only a strong sense of purpose. I was here to keep a promise. We walked into the reception area, which screamed understated wealth, pristine white marble floors, gleaming glass walls, and a solitary piece of modern art. A courteous receptionist guided us along a hushed hallway. Through the boardroom's glass walls, there was Mark, commanding the room, truly in his zone. He was lively and self-assured, gesturing towards a large screen filled with colorful, upward-trending graphs. 3 men, dressed in sharp, dark suits, partners from Oakfield Capital, sat around the table, listening with the kind of intense stillness that comes from making big decisions regularly. We paused at the doorway. Mark's voice, smooth and steady, was slightly muted. I took a deep breath and thought of Carol, how she had held my hand in that chilly hospital room. "Don't let them make it worthless," she had told me, and I intended to honor that. Mr. Davies gave me a subtle nod. It was showtime. He opened the door, and we stepped into the room. The view was breathtaking, with the sprawling vastness of Manhattan laid out like a kingdom at our feet. Mark was mid-speech, radiating clarity and intensity. With our family trust providing strong multi-generational financial support, our Q4 expansion isn't a mere goal, it's a certainty. His timing was flawless. The door whispered shut, drawing the attention of all 4 men present. The trio of investors regarded us with curiosity. Meanwhile, Mark's face flickered with emotions, from surprise to irritation at the interruption, ending with a flash of panic in his eyes. His confidence shook, and he nervously uttered, "Dad!" in a voice suddenly higher-pitched. "Mr. Davies, what's going on? This is a meeting." I held back from responding to him. I wasn't here for that. My focus was on the truth. I fixed my gaze on the man orchestrating the meeting, the senior partner, whose authoritative gray eyes demanded respect. I walked up to the table with deliberate calm, my steps barely audible on the plush carpet. Mr. Davies stayed close by, a half step behind. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and clear, much like a principal addressing a gathering. It reverberated in the room's quiet. "I'm David Harrison. I apologize for barging in like this." I paused, letting my presence sink in. As the sole trustee of the Harrison Family Trust, I heard our name was being invoked, and felt it necessary to shed light on the matter. Mark stood frozen, his mouth agape. "Dad, this isn't appropriate," he said, a note of desperation in his voice. I ignored him, keeping my eyes locked on the senior partner. At that moment, Mr. Davies moved forward. He efficiently opened his briefcase and laid out sleek, plain folders for each investor. Their elegant, unadorned design was significant in itself. "If you wouldn't mind, gentlemen," Davies said smoothly, "this will be brief." A tense silence settled as the men glanced at each other before simultaneously opening the folders. The quiet was so profound, the rustling of paper was audible. I knew exactly what they were seeing. Davies and I had reviewed the documents extensively. They were straightforward, concise, and incredibly damning. The initial page featured a solitary, notarized declaration from the Harrison Family Trust. It unequivocally stated, in legal terms, that the trust had no investments, no future plans, and zero financial connections with Sterling Financial LLC or any related parties. It was a flat-out, complete denial. The following page showed a high-quality reproduction of a fake letter of intent Mark had fabricated, claiming a $5 million investment from my trust. Attached was a short report from a handwriting analyst, definitively proving the David Harrison signature was forged. The third and final page was the most ruthless. It was a letter addressed to the Enforcement Division of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. It formally called for a federal investigation into Sterling Financial for utilizing fraudulent documents to lure investment money. This wasn't an idle threat. It was a declaration of an ongoing battle. I watched their expressions as they read, finding the transition fascinating. Their initial polite curiosity gradually transformed into focused concern. I noticed their jaws clenching and eyes narrowing, even though they kept their professional masks firmly in place. The room suddenly felt colder, almost like the air was heavy with the hard truth that we had all been misled. It wasn't just a simple contract falling apart. It was something much bigger. It was witnessing the unfolding of a crime, and it was clear who the targets were. When the senior partner finally looked up from the papers he was reading, he let his gaze linger, avoiding both me and Mr. Davies. Instead, he focused on Mark, who had turned alarmingly pale and was visibly trembling. There wasn't any expression on the partner's face. His calmness was unnerving, resembling a judge who had already made his decision. He calmly closed the folder. Then, with deliberate precision, he reached for Mark's bright business proposal lying on the table. Without opening it, he pushed it across until it stopped in front of my son-in-law. "This meeting," he announced, his voice steady yet final, "is over." With that, I had kept my promise. No more words were required. I nodded to the investors as a sign of respect. Mr. Davies did too. Together we walked out, without a backward glance at Mark. I didn't need to see the fallout. I could feel it, the downfall of a life built on lies. When the door clicked shut behind us, sealing Mark in his glass-walled prison of his own making, the heavy burden I had carried for a decade seemed to evaporate. The underdog had prevailed without a single raised voice. We made our way down the long, silent corridor, our steps whisked away by the plush carpet. The receptionist was engrossed in her work and remained oblivious to the significant collapse she had indirectly observed. Just another pair of suit-clad men exiting a meeting. Mr. Davies was silent, understanding there was nothing more to say. He walked beside me, a quiet ally in the most discreet upheaval Wall Street had ever seen. At the elevator, he pressed the button, causing it to light up. The wall across was glossy black marble, dark and mirror-like. In its reflection, I saw us both. Davies, the very image of a sharp New York lawyer, stood tall. And then there was me. For years, seeing my reflection had introduced a stranger, a retired, widowed man, slightly bent with grief and losses rather than what's left. The man Mark thought of as a failure. Yet, standing there waiting for the elevator, I didn't see a failure. I saw someone upright, with squared shoulders, strength in his eyes, and a once unseen resolve in his jaw. The old Navy suit didn't look dated anymore. It now looked like the uniform of a man of substance, someone who didn't require brand names to show his worth. The reflection was not of the man haunted by solitude in his home, but of the man who had partnered with his wife to build a dream with just a recipe and sheer determination, committed to defending what they achieved. A soft ding announced the elevator's arrival. The doors parted smoothly, and I took one last look at the reflection, smiling for the first time since she passed. I finally knew who I was again, not just anyone, but Carol Harrison's husband. Mr. Davies gestured for me to step in, and I did, leaving the reflection and the remains of Mark Sterling's plans on that upper floor. As the doors closed, the gentle hum of descent surrounded me with peace, comforted by a promise honored. Life moved on, even after the personal earthquakes. Weeks after Oakfield Capital, a calm routine returned. Gardening, coffee with friends, reading the paper by the light spilling over the kitchen table. I didn't need updates on Mark's situation. I never had to discuss it with Jessica. The truth planted in that boardroom would eventually surface in its own time. The consequences were inevitable, just a matter of when they'd unfold. About a month later, I was going through my usual morning ritual of skimming through the New York Times business section on my tablet. That's when I saw it, a small headline at the bottom of the page that somehow shocked and didn't surprise me at the same time. It read, "Sterling Financial collapses after failed funding round. CEO under federal investigation." I clicked to read more. The article was short, straightforward, and lacking warmth. It documented the abrupt downfall of a fintech startup that had once appeared promising. An insider from Oakfield Capital mentioned that there were serious claims of financial deceit, causing their investment to be promptly withdrawn. It also stated that the Securities and Exchange Commission had begun an investigation into Mark Sterling for potential securities fraud, with criminal charges possibly looming. Toward the end, there was a link to a real estate blog about a fire sale of a luxury penthouse in Tribeca, the very one Mark and Jessica had once bragged about. Now, it seemed they'd moved to a simple two-bedroom rental in a less fashionable area of Brooklyn. Reading this, I didn't feel triumphant or satisfied. No chance to say "I told you so." Instead, there was a heavy sadness inside me. I imagined Jessica, my daughter, in a small, anonymous apartment with boxes everywhere, her shiny world fallen apart. She'd swapped her integrity for luxury, and now had neither. It was tragic, even if it was brought on by her own actions. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge is hot, fueled by anger, leaving a void. This felt different. It felt like balance, a reset. The inevitable result of living a lie, like watching a crooked tree finally fall in a storm. The destruction is there, yet you know the forest will be better without it. I didn't orchestrate their downfall. I only aimed to protect my wife's legacy. Their collapse was simply the price of their choices. I closed the tablet, leaving their story behind on a blank screen. I glanced outside at my garden, where the first tomatoes of the season were turning red on the vine, honest and real. It was a somber yet necessary justice that was finally served. The call came during a laid-back Sunday afternoon while I was in the garden, tying up tomato plants heavy with fruit. The earthy, green aroma on my hands took me back to simpler times with Carol. It was a calming, authentic scent. When my phone vibrated, Jessica's name popped up, and I felt no anger or worry, just a peaceful anticipation. I knew she'd call, and I knew what I needed to say. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I answered. For a moment, all I heard was her unsteady breathing, then a muffled sob. "Dad." Her voice was no longer sharp and entitled. It was soft, broken. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I'm in the new apartment." Her words spilled out, interspersed with tears. "It's so small. I can hear the neighbors through the walls. My so-called friends, they don't call anymore. The parties are over. It's all gone, Dad." She took a breath, trying to steady herself. Then she admitted, "I see now it was never real. None of it. Just a grand, empty house, and I was just as hollow." As I listened, I pictured her in a bare, small room, with her facade shattered. A part of me, the father, wanted to rush to her, offer comfort, pay the rent, and assure her everything would be all right. But that was the old me. That was the man who had let this happen in the first place. I'd come to understand that love doesn't always mean smoothing the path. Sometimes, love, it was about accepting that some lessons are hard. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she finally said, as if pulling the words from deep within herself. "I got lost in it all. The money, the lifestyle. It blinded me. I watched him mistreat you and stayed silent. I chose shallow things over my own father. There's no excuse for that. I was wrong." Hearing such a sincere apology from her was something I hadn't experienced in over 10 years, and I believed her. Once her sobs subsided into quiet resignation, I began to speak. My tone was gentle, not one of forgiveness, more like a teacher's or a guide's. "I hear you, Jessica," I said softly. "I'm sorry for your pain." I paused, looking at the sturdy green tomato plants grounded in honest soil right in front of us. "The world you got caught up in," I went on, "wasn't really about success. It was just a bunch of distractions. Your mom and I built our lives and what we have today because of two key things: honesty and hard work. That's her legacy, and it's the greatest gift I can offer you. Not money, but the values we held dear." I could hear her quiet breathing from the other end, knowing she was absorbing every word. "I love you, Jessica. You'll always be my daughter. But this is your journey to fix. You need to find something meaningful in your own life now." Choosing my words wisely, I said, "Your mother's legacy is grounded in honesty and hard work. When you're ready to live by these principles and create a life founded on them, reach out to me. We can talk then." I didn't slam the door shut, but I didn't throw it wide open either. I handed her the key, and it was up to her to find the courage to turn it. Getting back to me and our family isn't about saying sorry. It's about making genuine changes within yourself. "Okay, Dad," she murmured softly. "I understand." We exchanged goodbyes, and I hung up. I stood there in the afternoon sun's warmth for quite a while, with the garden's sweet fragrance enveloping me. A relationship that thrived on dependence was now gone. But maybe, just maybe, there was room to build something new based on mutual respect. 6 months down the road, rather than being stuck in a boardroom or a lawyer's office, I found myself on the worn wooden stage of a high school gym in a neglected part of town. Instead of investors in fancy suits, the room was full of eager, bright-eyed students. The air was filled with the comforting smell of chalk and old varnish, much more pleasant to me than any high-end restaurant. Looking at the students, my smile was sincere, and it lit up my face. "My wife, Carol, had a dream," I began, speaking with a clear, steady voice. "It wasn't about a business plan or a bank loan. It all started in our garage with a box of tomatoes from our garden and her grandmother's old recipe book. People called us foolish and doubted us, but we kept believing in the payoff of hard work and creating something real. I shared our true story, filled with late nights, early mornings, failures, and small victories. Then I explained why I was speaking that day. Today, I said, with a pride I hadn't felt in ages, in honor of her spirit, the Harrison Family Trust is establishing the Carol Harrison Scholarship. It's a 4-year, fully funded grant available to any graduating senior from this school who dreams of building their future. Excited whispers spread through the gym. Seeing their faces light up with fresh hopes made me realize something important. I had truly honored Carol's legacy, not by stashing away her fortune, but by igniting hopes and dreams in the next generation. I found myself again, not as just a widower or a rich guy defined by numbers. I became a teacher, a builder, Carol Harrison's husband, and my journey was only beginning. This story reminds us that true strength isn't in wealth, but in quiet dignity, self-respect, and grace. When faced with disrespect, especially from family, the strongest response isn't a heated argument, but calmly refusing to be diminished. David didn't seek revenge. He simply took his support away from an unstable foundation, leaving those who took him for granted to face reality. It's a reminder that our worth isn't granted by others. The most profound lessons arise not from anger, but from the calm, steadfast strength of truth.